In the beginning, when the world was just a blank canvas, God spoke, and creation came to life. He separated light from darkness, formed the heavens, and established the earth. With his word, he filled the world with crystal-clear rivers, towering mountains, and green fields that danced in the wind. He created the stars to illuminate the day and night, and with a breath of his breath, life emerged in all its forms. Birds soared through the skies, beasts roamed the earth, and the seas teemed with wondrous creatures. But the masterpiece of creation was not yet complete. God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Thus, the first man, Adam, opened his eyes in the midst of a paradise like no other. Before him lay Eden, a garden where every tree bore abundant fruit and water flowed in rivers of unparalleled purity. Adam walked through Eden in awe, admiring the greatness of his Creator. God gave him dominion over every living thing and entrusted him with a task: to tend the garden and enjoy its fruits. However, there was one restriction. In the center of Eden grew two special trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God warned Adam, "Of all the trees of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." Adam lived in harmony with creation, but God saw that it was not good for man to be alone. So, while Adam was fast asleep, God took one of his ribs and formed the first woman, Eve. When Adam awoke and saw her, his heart was filled with joy. "This is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh," he exclaimed. From that moment on, Adam and Eve were companions, united in a perfect existence in the presence of God. But peace in Eden would not last forever. Among the lush trees of Eden, a presence lurked in silence. The serpent, the most cunning of all creatures, slithered stealthily toward Eve. With soft and seductive words, it whispered, "So, God has forbidden you to eat from all the trees in the garden?" Eve, unaware of the danger, replied, "We may eat the fruit of all the trees, except the one in the middle of the garden. God said that if we eat from it, we will die." The serpent, with a subtle smile, responded, "You will not surely die. God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like him, knowing good and evil." The serpent's words awakened a new sensation in Eve. She looked at the forbidden tree and saw that its fruit was beautiful, desirable, and pleasant to the eyes, something to be desired for gaining wisdom. A thought crossed her mind. Why would God deny me something so good? Without hesitation, she reached out her hand, took the fruit, and bit into it. An unfamiliar sensation coursed through her body. Then she offered the fruit to Adam, who was with her. Adam, in a moment of hesitation, remembered God's warning, but curiosity and desire were stronger. He took the fruit and ate as well. And then, everything changed. For the first time, their eyes were open to a different reality. They looked at each other and felt shame. Before, their nakedness had not been a concern, but now they saw themselves as vulnerable, exposed. Hastily, they took fig leaves and made rudimentary garments to cover themselves. The wind of Eden whispered among the trees, and suddenly, they heard a familiar sound, the footsteps of God walking in the garden. But this time, instead of running toward him, they hid among the bushes, fearful and filled with guilt. God called out, "Adam, where are you?" Adam, with a trembling voice, answered, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid." God, firmly but sadly, asked, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat?" Adam, feeling the weight of his mistake, tried to justify himself. "The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit, and I ate." God then looked at Eve. "What is this you have done?" Eve, with a racing heart, replied, "The serpent deceived me and I ate." But excuses would not change the reality. The harmony of Eden had been broken, and the consequences were about to come. God, with a voice that resonated like the echo of thunder and the breeze of the evening, first turned to the serpent. "Because you have done this, you are cursed more than all the livestock and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life." Then, with words that contained both judgment and hope, he declared, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." These words were not only a punishment for the serpent but also a prophecy about the future. One day, a descendant of Eve would bring redemption and defeat the deceiver forever. Then God looked at the woman and said, "I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." Eve felt the weight of these words. Motherhood, which had been a pure blessing, would now be accompanied by suffering. The relationship with her husband, which had been perfect in Eden, would now face challenges and conflict. Finally, God turned to Adam. Because you have heeded the voice of your wife and eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Adam felt how God's words penetrated his soul. The earth, which had once given fruit in abundance without effort, would now demand sweat and fatigue. Death, which had never been part of the original plan, was now his inevitable destiny. Eden, the paradise of perfection, was no longer his home. In an act of grace and justice, God made garments of skin for Adam and Eve, covering their nakedness with clothing that would remind them of the cost of their sin. Then, with deep sadness, God expelled them from the garden. He placed cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Adam and Eve looked for the last time at Eden from a distance. What had once been a home of peace and abundance was now only a memory. Outside, the world awaited them. A world where work would be hard, pain would be real, but where hope remained. The promise that one day, the woman's offspring would bring redemption. And so began the story of humanity, outside of Eden, but not outside the reach of God. Adam and Eve walked through the unknown land, leaving Eden behind. Each step they took in this new world reminded them of the difference between the lost perfection and the harsh reality they now faced. The land, once fertile and abundant, now required effort to bear fruit. Sweat ran down Adam's forehead as he worked the hardened earth. Eve, in turn, experienced the pain God had foretold when she gave birth to her first son. Cain was the firstborn, followed by Abel. Hope was reborn in their hearts as they saw their children grow. Perhaps, in some way, God's promise regarding the woman's offspring was beginning to be fulfilled. But sin, which had entered the world with their disobedience, soon manifested in their family. Cain was a farmer, and Abel was a shepherd. Both brought offerings to God. Abel brought the best of his flock, and Cain offered the fruits of the earth. God looked favorably upon Abel's offering, but did not accept Cain's. Not because Cain's sacrifice was less valuable in itself, but because his heart was not in the right place. Envy burned in Cain's heart. God warned him, "Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, desiring to have you, but you must rule over it." However, Cain did not listen. His fury turned into action. One day he took Abel into the field and there, in a fit of rage, he killed him. The earth, which had already been cursed by Adam's disobedience, now drank Abel's blood, becoming a witness to the first murder in history. God confronted Cain. "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain, defiant, replied, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" God's voice resonated with judgment. "The blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Upon hearing his fate, Cain was afraid. "My punishment is more than I can bear. Anyone who finds me will kill me." But God, even in the midst of judgment, showed mercy. He put a mark on Cain so that no one would kill him. And Cain went away, further distancing himself from the presence of God, establishing his own descendants in the land of Nod. Meanwhile, Adam and Eve mourned the loss of their children, one dead, the other exiled. But God, true to his promise, gave them another son, Seth. And through him, a new line of hope began, a lineage through which, generations later, the one who would finally defeat sin and restore what had been lost in Eden would be born. The years passed, and humanity began to multiply upon the face of the earth. Through Seth, the descendants of Adam and Eve grew, and with them, the hope that one day God's promise would be fulfilled. However, with the growth of humanity, evil also increased. The sin that began with a single act of disobedience in Eden spread like a shadow over all of creation. The generations that came after Adam and Eve divided into two paths. Some sought God, like Enoch, who walked with the Lord and was taken without seeing death. But others drifted further away, giving themselves over to corruption, violence, and idolatry. Humanity, in its desire to live on its own terms, began to fill the earth with wickedness and rebellion. Adam and Eve, in their old age, looked upon what the world had become. They wondered if their mistake in Eden had condemned all their descendants. But despite the darkness, they knew that God had not abandoned his purpose. The Creator had always been faithful, even in the midst of discipline and the consequences of sin. Adam, with the years marked on his face and the weight of a long life on his shoulders, shared with his children and grandchildren the story of Eden. He spoke to them of the lost paradise, the beauty of the garden where they had walked with God, and the pain of separation. But more than that, he spoke to them of hope. "The serpent deceived us," he would say, But God promised that one day the descendant of the woman would crush its head. One day all will be restored. Though we now live outside the garden, the story is not over yet. Adam lived 930 years before he died. Eve, his companion from the beginning, also grew old and saw many generations born and grow. Together, they were witnesses to the devastation that sin had brought into the world, but also to the glimpses of God's mercy. When they finally left this world, their story did not end with them. Their lineage continued, and with it, God's promise. Although humanity would drift even further from its creator, God would never cease to work in history. Through Seth's line would come Noah, then Abraham, and eventually the promised Messiah. The story of Adam and Eve is not just the story of the first humans. It is the story of each one of us. It is the tale of the fall, the sin that separates us from God, but also the divine love that never abandons us. Despite our disobedience, God continues to call us, offering a path of redemption. And so, the story of the beginning became the story of all humanity. The quest to walk with God again, as Adam and Eve once did in that lost garden, waiting for the day when all will be restored. The descendants of Adam and Eve continued to populate the earth, and with each generation, the distance between humanity and God seemed to grow larger. However, in the midst of the darkness, there were glimpses of hope, people who still sought God and walked in his righteousness. One of them was Noah, a man who found favor in the eyes of the Lord. In his time, the wickedness of humanity had reached its peak. Corruption and violence filled the earth, and God, with deep sorrow, decided to put an end to that era with a great flood. But in his mercy, he preserved Noah and his family, ensuring that the promise made in Eden would not be forgotten. After the flood, humanity began to multiply again, but the sinful nature remained. Civilizations arose, great cities and powerful kingdoms, but with them came idolatry and rebellion against God. In the midst of this fallen world, God continued to work in history, choosing a man named Abraham to make him a great nation, through which all the families of the earth would be blessed. The lineage of Adam and Eve extended through the centuries. From Abraham came Isaac, then Jacob, and from Jacob the 12 tribes of Israel. God was forming a people who would bear his name, a people who would remember the promise made in Eden. That one day, the one who would defeat the enemy and restore what had been lost would come. Centuries passed, and with them came prophets, kings, and judges. Moses led Israel out of Egypt, David reigned over Jerusalem, and the prophets proclaimed that a Messiah would come. Each story, each prophecy, pointed to one truth: God had not forgotten his promise. And then, when the time was right, in a small town called Bethlehem, the one who would change history forever was born. Jesus, the Son of God, came into the world as the promised descendant of the woman, the one who would crush the head of the serpent and restore the broken relationship between God and humanity. Jesus lived without sin, taught about the kingdom of God, and, in a supreme act of love, gave his life on the cross to pay the price for sin. In that moment, the curse of Eden began to crumble. Death could not hold him, and on the third day he rose again, securing victory over sin and death. What began in the Garden of Eden now found its redemption in the cross. Jesus is the answer to God's promise, the way back to communion with the Creator. Through him, humanity can be restored, not to an earthly garden, but to an eternal relationship with God. Thus, the story of Adam and Eve is not just a tale from the past, but the beginning of a redemption that continues to transform lives. God's invitation remains open: to return to him, trust in his plan, and walk in his grace, awaiting the day when all things will be restored and humanity will be in full communion with its Creator. The story of humanity began in a garden and is heading towards a new creation. From the fall in Eden to Christ's victory on the cross, God has been working to restore what was lost. But the story doesn't end there. After his resurrection, Jesus ascended to heaven with the promise that he would return one day. In the meantime, his followers were sent to proclaim the gospel, the message of salvation that offers new life to all who believe in him. Through the centuries, the message of the cross has transformed countless hearts, bringing people back to God. But there is still more. The Bible speaks of a future where God will create new heavens and a new earth, where there will be no more death, pain, or suffering. In the book of Revelation, we are given a vision of the restored paradise, where God will dwell with his people, and everything will be made new. What was lost in Eden will be restored in eternity. There will no longer be any separation between God and humanity, because the work of Christ has reconciled those who believe in him. Thus, the story of Adam and Eve is not just the account of a fall, but the beginning of a great redemption. It is the story of a God who never abandoned his creation, who charted a path back, and who, in the end, will fulfill his promise to restore all things. The invitation remains open. Through Jesus, every person has the opportunity to return to communion with God, to walk in his purpose, and to joyfully await the day when all things will be renewed. From Eden to eternity, This is the story of God's unbreakable love for humanity. The stories that changed the world still have so much to teach us today. Are you ready to discover them all? If you're passionate about these epic stories, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss any of the adventures we still have to tell. Every week, a new story that will make you see the past in a whole new way. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, full of action, lessons, and surprises.